A rancher spent his last dollar to buy a woman at auction. What he didn't know: she wasn't broken, she was dangerous, and the town that sold her would burn before they'd let her stay free. If you want to find out how one reckless choice ignited a range war, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Now let me take you back to 1884, to the dust and blood of the frontier, where mercy could cost you everything. The sun over Crest Valley didn't forgive. It beat down on the wooden trading post like a hammer on an anvil, turning the air thick and shimmering, making every breath taste of dust and sweat. Wyatt Mercer stood at the edge of the crowd, hat pulled low, shoulders squared beneath a canvas coat that had seen better years. His boots were cracked leather, his hands scarred from rope and branding iron, and his eyes, gray as winter stone, scanned the chaos of the frontier market with the wariness of a man who'd learned long ago that trouble wore 1,000 faces. He'd come to buy a horse. That was all. He had $43 folded into his shirt pocket, earned from a brutal spring of cattle drives and fence mending, and he needed a steady mare to replace the one he'd lost to colic 2 weeks prior. The ranch didn't run itself, and he'd already been making do with one gelding and a mule too stubborn to ride. But the moment he heard the auctioneer's voice crack across the square, sharp, greasy, selling something that wasn't livestock, Wyatt's gut clenched. "Gentlemen, gentlemen, step closer now, don't be shy." The trader was a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth and a hat banded in rattlesnake skin. He stood on a wagon bed, one hand gesturing wildly, the other gripping a chain. "I've got something rare for you today, real rare. A woman, strong as an ox, young enough to last you a decade if you treat her right. Or don't." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "No papers, no kin, no questions asked. She's yours to work, to wed, to do with as you please." Wyatt's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before. Not often. This far west, it was rarer than in the war-torn South. But he'd seen it. People sold like cattle. Human beings stripped of name and dignity, reduced to currency. He should have walked away. But then the trader yanked on the chain, and she stumbled forward into the light. Wyatt's breath caught. She was small, barely 5.5 feet, but she stood like she occupied twice that space. Her dress was little more than rags, torn at the shoulder and stained with God knew what. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, rubbed raw and bleeding in places. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, and her face, bruised along the cheekbone, cut at the lip, was tilted upward in defiance, not submission. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Dark, deep, burning. Not with fear, not with resignation, with fury. She swept her gaze across the crowd, and for one breath, one impossible moment, those eyes landed on Wyatt. They held him, measured him, judged him, and found him wanting, same as all the rest. "What do I hear, boys?" the trader crowed. "Start me at $10. $10 for a prime piece of—" "She's got the mark!" someone shouted from the back. "Look at her neck!" The crowd shifted, murmuring. The trader's grin faltered for half a second, then widened. "So what if she does? That just means she's got spirit. Means she'll work twice as hard to prove herself." Wyatt couldn't see the mark from where he stood, but he didn't need to. He'd heard the stories. Brands, scars, symbols burned or carved into flesh to mark someone as cursed, dangerous, or condemned. Sometimes it was deserved. Most times it wasn't. "I'll give you $5, a man in a battered union coat called out. "And that's generous. She looks half dead already." $5? The trader spat into the dust. "You insult me, sir. This woman's got years left in her. Look at those hands, strong hands. Look at that back, straight as a pine. She'll birth you sons, mend your clothes, cook your meals, or poison your stew," another voice cut in, and the crowd erupted in laughter. The woman didn't flinch, didn't lower her gaze. She just stood there, silent and still, as if the words couldn't touch her. But Wyatt saw the tremor in her hands, saw the way her breath came shallow and fast. She was holding on by a thread. $10, a gravelly voice said from the left. A big man with a scar running down his jaw stepped forward, grinning. "I'll take her. Work her till she drops, then bury her quiet." More laughter. The trader nodded eagerly. Now that's more like it. $10, do I hear 56? Wyatt's hands curled into fists. He should walk away. He had a ranch to run, bills to pay, a horse to buy. He didn't need another mouth to feed, another soul to worry about. He'd spent the last 6 years keeping his head down, staying out of other people's business, trying to outrun the ghosts of a war that had taken everything from him. But those eyes, that straight back, that silent burning refusal to break. $43, Wyatt heard himself say. The crowd went quiet. Every head turned toward him. The trader blinked, then broke into a wide yellow grin. Well, well, looks like we've got ourselves a serious buyer. $43. That's more like it, friend. You've got taste. The scarred man scowled. 45. Wyatt's stomach dropped. He didn't have 45. He didn't even have 44. The trader's eyes gleamed. 45. Do I hear 50? Wyatt stepped forward, shouldering through the crowd until he stood at the base of the wagon. He looked up at the trader, then at the woman. She was staring at him now, those dark eyes unreadable. 43 is all I've got, Wyatt said quietly. But I'll add my horse, a 6-year-old gelding, sound and healthy, worth at least 20 more. The trader's eyebrows shot up. Your horse? That's the offer. The scarred man laughed. You're going to walk home? Wyatt didn't answer him. He kept his eyes on the trader. The trader scratched his chin, then glanced at the woman. She must be something special if you're willing to walk 20 miles for her. She's a person, Wyatt said flatly. Not a thing. The crowd stirred. A few men chuckled. Others frowned. The trader shrugged. A person, a thing, don't matter to me. But I like your spirit, friend. Sold. $43 in the gelding. Wyatt felt the weight of every eye on him as he pulled the folded bills from his pocket and handed them over. The trader counted them twice, grinning the whole time, then gestured to one of his men to fetch the horse. She's all yours, the trader said, tossing the end of the chain toward Wyatt. Good luck with her. You'll need it. Wyatt caught the chain, then immediately dropped it into the dust. He stepped up onto the wagon bed and pulled a knife from his belt. The woman flinched. I'm not going to hurt you, Wyatt said quietly. I'm cutting the ropes. Hold still. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her eyes stayed locked on his as he sawed through the bindings around her wrists. The moment the rope fell away, she pulled her hands close to her chest, cradling the raw, bleeding skin. Can you walk? Wyatt asked. She nodded once. Then let's go. He climbed down from the wagon and started walking. After a moment, he heard her footsteps behind him, soft, careful, like she expected the ground to open up beneath her. The crowd parted as they passed. Some men laughed, others muttered. One woman spat in the dirt at the girl's feet. Wyatt didn't look back. He just kept walking, out of the trading post, past the saloon and the general store, toward the edge of town where the dirt road stretched into the endless prairie. It wasn't until they were a quarter-mile out, the noise of the town fading behind them, that Wyatt finally stopped. He turned to face her. She stood a few paces back, watching him with that same unreadable expression. What's your name? Wyatt asked. She didn't answer. I'm Wyatt. Wyatt Mercer. I've got a ranch about 20 miles south of here. It's not much, but it's quiet. You'll be safe there. Still nothing. Wyatt sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I don't know what you've been through, and I'm not asking, but I need you to understand something. I didn't buy you to own you. I bought you to get you out of there. When we get to the ranch, you can stay as long as you need. You can leave whenever you want. I'm not your master. I'm just a man who made a choice. The woman's eyes flickered with something, surprise maybe, or suspicion, but she still didn't speak. Wyatt turned and started walking again. Come on, we've got a long way to go and the sun's not getting any cooler. They walked in silence for over an hour. The prairie stretched out around them, golden and endless, dotted with sagebrush and scattered stones. The sky was a hard, merciless blue, and the heat pressed down like a living thing. Wyatt's boots kicked up dust with every step. His throat was dry, his legs aching, and his mind churned with questions he didn't have answers to. What the hell had he just done? He'd spent every dollar he had. He'd traded his only riding horse. He was walking home with a stranger who wouldn't speak, wouldn't meet his eyes for more than a second, and who the town had clearly marked as dangerous. And for what? Because of a look in her eyes? Because he'd seen too many people broken by the world and he couldn't stand to see one more? Or because deep down he was still trying to make up for all the things he couldn't save during the war? He didn't know. And right now, with the sun baking his brain and his stomach growling, he didn't care. "Water," the woman said. Wyatt stopped, turned. She was standing a few paces back, one hand shading her eyes, the other pointing west. "There. Water." Wyatt followed her gaze. He saw nothing but open land. "Where?" "Follow me." Before he could argue, she turned and started walking, veering off the road toward a low rise in the distance. Wyatt hesitated, then followed. 10 minutes later, they crested the rise, and Wyatt's mouth fell open. There, hidden in a shallow basin, was a spring, clear, cold water bubbling up from the rocks and pooling into a small, shaded oasis surrounded by cottonwoods. "How did you—" Wyatt started, but the woman was already kneeling by the water, cupping her hands and drinking deeply. Wyatt joined her, dropping to his knees and splashing water over his face and neck. It was ice cold and tasted like heaven. When he finally sat back, wiping his mouth, he looked at her. "How did you know that was here?" She didn't answer. She was staring at the water, her fingers trailing through it, her expression distant. "Can you talk?" Wyatt asked, more gently this time. "Yes," she said softly. "Then what's your name?" A long pause. Then, so quiet he almost didn't hear it. "Lena." "Lena," Wyatt repeated. "That's a good name." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time he saw something other than fury or suspicion in her eyes. He saw exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. Wyatt nodded. "Don't mention it." They rested for a while in the shade, then filled Wyatt's canteen and set off again. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, when Wyatt saw the first clouds gathering in the north. Dark clouds, moving fast. "Storm's coming," he muttered. Lena looked up, her eyes scanning the sky. Then she turned to him, her expression sharp. "We need to move. Now." "It's still miles off." "Now," she said again, and there was something in her voice, certainty, urgency, that made Wyatt listen. They picked up the pace, half walking, half jogging across the prairie. The wind began to rise, hot and dry, whipping Lena's hair around her face. The sky darkened, the clouds swelling and churning like a living thing, and then Wyatt saw it. A wall of dust stretching from earth to sky, rolling toward them like the wrath of God itself. "Run!" he shouted. They ran. The storm hit with a roar that drowned out everything else. The world disappeared into a choking, blinding haze. Wyatt couldn't see his own hands in front of his face. He stumbled, coughing, his lungs burning. Then he felt a hand grab his arm. "Lena." She pulled him forward, somehow navigating through the chaos, her grip strong and sure. Wyatt didn't question it. He just followed. Minutes felt like hours. His legs screamed. His chest ached. He was ready to collapse when suddenly the dust thinned, the wind quieted, and they stumbled into a canyon. Narrow, sheltered, hidden between two rocky ridges. Wyatt collapsed against the stone wall, gasping for air. Lena sank down beside him, her chest heaving. "How did you—" Wyatt started, but the words died in his throat. She was looking at him with those dark, burning eyes, and for the first time he saw something else in them. Power. Not the kind that came from muscle or weapons. Something older, deeper. Something the world had tried to beat out of her and failed. "You'll keep me safe?" she asked quietly. Wyatt met her gaze. "I will." "Even when they come for me?" His stomach tightened. "Who's coming for you?" Lena looked away, back toward the storm. "Everyone." And in that moment, Wyatt understood. He hadn't just rescued a stranger, he'd brought a storm home with him, and there was no going back. They waited in the canyon until the dust storm passed, which took the better part of 2 hours. Wyatt sat with his back against the cool stone, watching the ochre wall of sand and wind rage just beyond their shelter. Lena sat across from him, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, saying nothing. The silence between them wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the silence of two people who had survived something together and didn't yet know what that meant. When the air finally cleared and the sun broke through in slanted golden rays, Wyatt stood and brushed the dust from his clothes. Every inch of him was coated in grit, his hair, his skin, the creases of his coat. Lena rose too, moving with a careful economy of motion, like someone who had learned not to waste energy on unnecessary things. "We should keep moving," Wyatt said. "We've got maybe 3 hours of daylight left, and I'd rather not spend the night out here." Lena nodded and followed him out of the canyon. The land had changed. The storm had reshaped the prairie, smoothing out old tracks and carving new patterns into the earth. Wyatt oriented himself by the position of the sun and the distant line of mountains to the west, then set off at a steady pace. Lena walked beside him now, instead of behind, her steps surprisingly light for someone who'd been through what she had. After a while, Wyatt broke the silence. "That canyon, how did you know it was there?" "I didn't." "Then how—" "I felt it," she said simply. Wyatt frowned. "Felt it?" "The shelter, the stillness. It called to me." She glanced at him, and there was a flicker of defiance in her eyes, like she was daring him to call her crazy. Wyatt just nodded. "Well, whatever it was, it saved our lives, so I'm grateful." She looked away, but he thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. They walked on. As the sun dipped lower, the landscape began to shift. The flat, open prairie gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and scrub oak. Wyatt's heart lifted a little. He knew this land. They were close now. "How long have you been out here?" Lena asked suddenly. 6 years, Wyatt said. "Came west after the war ended. Bought the ranch from a man who'd given up on it. It's not much, just a house, a barn, a few acres of decent grazing land. But it's mine." "You fought in the war?" "Yeah." Wyatt's jaw tightened. Union sighed. "Made it through without losing any limbs, which is more than a lot of men can say. But I lost other things." Lena didn't press. She just nodded, as if she understood the weight of things that couldn't be spoken. "What about you?" Wyatt asked. "Where are you from?" "Nowhere," she said quietly. "Everywhere. I was born in a wagon somewhere between Missouri and the territories. My mother died when I was young. My father sold me when I was 12. Wyatt's stomach turned. "Sold you?" "To a family that needed help on their farm. They worked me hard, but they fed me. I stayed until I was 16, then I ran." She paused, her eyes distant. "I've been running ever since." "And the mark?" Wyatt asked carefully. "The one they mentioned back at the trading post?" Lena's hand went to her neck, fingers brushing the collar of her torn dress. "It's nothing." "Didn't sound like nothing." "It's a scar," she said flatly, "from a man who thought he owned me. He said I was cursed because I could do things other people couldn't. He tried to burn it out of me." Her voice was calm, matter of fact, like she was talking about the weather. "It didn't work." Wyatt felt a cold anger settle in his chest. "What kind of things?" Lena looked at him for a long moment, weighing something in her mind. Then she said, "I can feel what animals feel, hear what they're thinking in a way. I know when they're hurt, when they're afraid, when they're dying. And sometimes I can help them." Wyatt didn't laugh, didn't scoff. He'd seen too much strangeness in the world, too much blood and madness and miracle, to dismiss anything out of hand. "Is that why they were afraid of you?" he asked. "People fear what they don't understand," Lena said, "and they hate what they fear." Wyatt nodded slowly. "Well, you don't have to be afraid anymore, not at my ranch." She gave him a long, searching look. "You say that now." "I mean it." "We'll see," she said softly. By the time they crested the final hill and Wyatt's ranch came into view, the sun was a red ember sinking into the horizon. The house was small and rough-hewn, built from weathered timber and stone, with a crooked chimney and a porch that sagged on one side. The barn stood 50 yards away, larger and sturdier than the house. Its red paint faded to a dull rust. A wooden fence encircled a paddock where Wyatt's mule stood dozing in the last light of day. It wasn't much, but it was home. "That's it," Wyatt said, a note of quiet pride in his voice. "Welcome to the Mercer Ranch." Lena said nothing, but her eyes moved over the land with an intensity that made Wyatt wonder what she was seeing that he couldn't. They walked down the hill together, and as they approached the barn, the mule lifted its head and let out a long, braying call. Wyatt grinned. "That's Sadie. She's cranky as hell, but she's loyal." Lena stopped in her tracks. The mule was staring at her, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. Then, to Wyatt's astonishment, Sadie walked straight to the fence, pushed her nose through the rails, and nickered softly. Lena stepped forward and placed her hand on the mule's muzzle. Sadie closed her eyes and leaned into the touch, utterly calm. "I'll be damned," Wyatt muttered. Lena stroked the mule's neck, her fingers moving with a gentle certainty. "She's tired," Lena said quietly, "and her left foreleg hurts. Old injury, it aches in the cold." Wyatt blinked. "How do you—" "I told you," Lena said, not looking at him. "I can feel it." Wyatt opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have words for what he was seeing. Lena stepped back from the fence, and Sadie watched her with an almost reverent stillness. "Where do you want me to sleep?" "The house," Wyatt said automatically. "I'll take the barn." "No," Lena said firmly. "I'll take the barn." "You don't have to. I prefer it," she said, and there was a finality in her voice that left no room for argument. Wyatt sighed. "All right, but I'm bringing you blankets and food. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks." "I haven't." He went into the house and gathered what he could: a wool blanket, a canteen of water, half a loaf of bread, some dried venison, and an apple he'd been saving. When he returned to the barn, Lena had already made herself a nest in the far corner, away from the door, where the shadows were deepest. She took the food without a word and ate slowly, methodically, like someone who had learned not to trust that the next meal would come. Wyatt watched her for a moment, then said, "I'll be in the house if you need anything. Door's always open." "Thank you," she said quietly. He turned to leave, then paused. "Lena?" "Yes?" "You're safe here. I mean that." She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something like hope flicker in her eyes. "I want to believe you," she said. "Then try." Wyatt left her there and walked back to the house. Inside, he lit a lamp, stoked the fire, and sat down at the table with his head in his hands. His mind was a storm of questions and doubts. What had he done? What would happen when the town found out he'd brought her here? How was he supposed to explain any of this? But beneath the worry, there was something else, a feeling he hadn't had in years. Purpose. He slept poorly that night, waking every hour to the sound of wind rattling the shutters or the distant howl of a coyote. But when dawn broke and he walked out to the barn to check on Lena, he found something that stopped him in his tracks. The barn door was open. Inside, Lena stood in the center of the floor, surrounded by animals. Sadie the mule was there, nuzzling Lena's shoulder. A barn cat Wyatt had never been able to get within 10 feet of was curled at her feet, purring. And perched on the edge of the stall was a red-tailed hawk, wild, fierce, and utterly calm, watching Lena with unblinking eyes. Wyatt stood frozen in the doorway. Lena turned and saw him. The hawk launched itself into the air with a sharp cry and vanished through the open door. The cat darted into the shadows. Sadie snorted and trotted back to her paddock. "I didn't mean to frighten them," Wyatt said carefully. "You didn't," Lena said. "They just know you're not like me." "What does that mean?" She looked at him with those dark, burning eyes. "It means they trust me because I understand them, and they don't trust you because you don't." Wyatt bristled. "I've worked with animals my whole life." "You work with them," Lena said. "I feel them." There was no arrogance in her voice, just truth. Wyatt let out a slow breath. "All right, fine. You've got a gift. I won't argue with that, but if you're going to stay here, we need to figure out how this is going to work." "I'll earn my keep," Lena said immediately. "I can tend the animals, fix what's broken, help with the harvest." "I'm not asking you to work." "I need to," she said, and there was a fierceness in her voice that cut through his protests. "I won't be a burden. I won't be owned. If I stay on my terms." Wyatt studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. We'll call it a partnership then. You help with the ranch, and I'll make sure you're fed, clothed, and safe." Deal? Lena hesitated, then extended her hand. Wyatt shook it. Her grip was strong. Over the next few days, Wyatt watched in quiet amazement as Lena transformed the ranch. She moved through the land like she'd been born to it, spotting things he'd missed and fixing problems he hadn't even known existed. She found a loose board in the barn that had been letting in rain and patched it with mud and grass. She discovered that one of the fence posts was rotting at the base and replaced it before it could collapse. She spent hours with Sadie, massaging the mule's sore leg with a poultice made from herbs she'd gathered in the hills, plants Wyatt didn't even recognize. And the animals responded to her like she was one of their own. The barn cat, which had always been skittish and feral, now followed Lena everywhere, weaving between her legs and purring like an engine. The hawk returned every morning, perching on the barn roof and watching her work. Even the chickens, which Wyatt had always found to be neurotic and aggressive, grew calm in her presence. But it was what happened with the injured dog that made Wyatt truly understand what Lena was capable of. On the fourth day, he was mending a section of fence when he heard a low, pained whine coming from the edge of the property. He followed the sound and found a stray dog. Half-starved, covered in burrs, with a deep gash across its shoulder that was infected and crawling with flies. The dog growled when Wyatt approached, baring its teeth. "Easy, boy," Wyatt murmured, crouching low. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog snapped at him, and Wyatt jerked back, cursing. "Let me!" He turned. Lena was standing a few feet away, her expression calm. "He'll bite you," Wyatt warned. "No, he won't." She walked forward slowly, her movements fluid and unhurried. The dog's growl deepened, but Lena didn't stop. She knelt in the dirt beside the animal and extended her hand, palm down, not reaching, just offering. The dog sniffed her fingers. Then, to Wyatt's shock, it lowered its head and let out a soft whine. Lena placed her hand on the dog's neck, her eyes closing. "He's in pain," she murmured, scared. "He doesn't understand why he hurts." "Can you help him?" Wyatt asked. "I can try." She spent the next hour cleaning the wound with water from the well, packing it with the same herbal poultice she'd used on Sadie, and wrapping it with strips of cloth torn from her own dress. The dog lay still the entire time, watching her with dark, trusting eyes. When she was finished, the dog stood, shook itself, and licked her hand. Wyatt stared. "I've never seen anything like that." "Most people haven't," Lena said quietly. She looked up at him, and there was a sadness in her eyes. "That's why they're afraid of me." "I'm not afraid of you," Wyatt said. "You should be." "Why?" "Because sooner or later someone's going to notice what I can do, and when they do, they'll come for me. And anyone who stands in their way will burn with me." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Let them come." Lena shook her head. "You don't understand. You can't fight this. Fear spreads faster than fire." "Then we'll deal with it when it comes," Wyatt said firmly. "But until then, you're staying here. You're safe here." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." But Wyatt could see the doubt in her eyes, and deep down, he felt it too. Because even as the ranch began to thrive under Lena's care, even as the animals grew healthier, the crops greener, the very air somehow lighter, Wyatt knew that the valley was watching, and the valley never forgot. It started small. A rider passing by the property, slowing his horse to stare at Lena as she worked in the garden. A neighbor stopping by to borrow tools and asking too many questions about the new woman Wyatt had brought home. Whispers in town when Wyatt went to buy supplies, conversations that stopped the moment he walked into the general store. Wyatt ignored it. He'd dealt with gossip before. People talked. That's what they did. But then old Marcus Kinley rode up to the ranch one afternoon, his face grim. Marcus was a good man, a widower who ran a small farm a few miles north. He and Wyatt had helped each other through hard winters and dry summers, and Wyatt trusted him more than most. "Wyatt," Marcus said as he dismounted, "we need to talk." "What's wrong?" Marcus glanced toward the barn where Lena was tending to the dog, which had made a full recovery and now followed her like a shadow. "It's about her." Wyatt's shoulders tensed. "What about her?" "People are talking, Wyatt, saying she's unnatural, that she's got some kind of devil's touch." That's ridiculous. Maybe so, Marcus said carefully. But my boy came down with a fever last week. High fever, wouldn't break. We thought we were going to lose him. Then I remembered what you said about your animals getting healthier, and I thought, maybe she could help. Wyatt's stomach tightened. What did you do? I brought him here. Yesterday, while you were in town. She wasn't in the house, so I rode to the barn, and I found her there with all those animals around her, and I asked if she could take a look at him. And? And she did, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. She put her hands on his forehead, closed her eyes, and just knew. She told me his blood was poisoned, that he'd been bitten by something, a tick, maybe, or a spider. She made a tea from plants she gathered in the hills and told me to give it to him 3 times a day. Did it work? The fever broke that night, Marcus said. By morning, he was sitting up and asking for food. Wyatt? She saved his life. Wyatt let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. That's good, Marcus. That's real good. It is, Marcus agreed, but now half the town knows about it, and not everyone's grateful. What do you mean? Marcus looked uncomfortable. Some folks are saying she's a witch, that she's cursed, that she shouldn't be allowed to stay here. Wyatt's hands curled into fists. She's not a witch. She's just different. Different's dangerous out here, Wyatt. You know that. I don't care what people think. You should, Marcus said quietly, because if they decide she's a threat, they won't just come for her. They'll come for you too. Wyatt met his friend's eyes. Then let them come. Marcus sighed and shook his head. You're a stubborn man, Wyatt Mercer. I just hope it doesn't get you killed. He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Wyatt standing alone in the yard, staring at the barn where Lena worked, unaware of the storm gathering around her. That night, Wyatt sat with Lena by the fire outside the barn. The stars were sharp and bright overhead, and the air was cool and clean. Marcus came by today, Wyatt said. Lena didn't look up from the piece of wood she was whittling. I know. You healed his son. I helped him, she corrected. The boy's body did the rest. People are talking about it. Lena set down the wood and looked at him. And you're worried. I'm careful, Wyatt said. There's a difference. No, there isn't, Lena said softly. Careful means you're afraid. And if you're afraid, maybe you should send me away before it's too late. I'm not sending you anywhere. Why not? She challenged. You don't owe me anything. You've already done more than most people would. You can walk away from this. So can you, Wyatt shot back. But you're still here. Lena looked away, her jaw tight. I have nowhere else to go. Then stay, Wyatt said, and we'll face whatever comes together. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, You really don't understand what you're risking, do you? Maybe not, Wyatt admitted, but I know what's right. And leaving you to fend for yourself, isn't it? Lena looked at him, and in the firelight, her eyes were soft and searching. Why do you care so much? Wyatt thought about that. He thought about the war, about the men he'd lost, the lives he couldn't save. He thought about the emptiness that had filled his days for 6 long years, the hollow ache of a life lived alone. And he thought about the moment he'd seen her standing in that wagon, bruised and bound but unbroken. Because I've spent too long watching people suffer and doing nothing about it, he said quietly, and I'm done with that. Lena's eyes glistened, and for a moment Wyatt thought she might cry. But she didn't. She just nodded and turned back to the fire. They sat in silence, the flames crackling between them, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Wyatt felt something shift. Not fear, not doubt. Trust. And in the days that followed, that trust deepened. Lena taught Wyatt things he'd never known, how to read the land, how to sense a coming storm, how to listen to the animals in a way that went beyond words. And Wyatt taught Lena things too, how to mend a saddle, how to build a fire that would last through the night, how to laugh at the absurdity of life on the frontier. The ranch flourished, the animals thrived, and slowly, carefully, Wyatt and Lena built something together that neither of them had ever had before. A home. But the valley was still watching, and the storm was coming closer. The storm that had been gathering finally broke on a Tuesday morning in late summer when Sarah Brennan rode into the valley with her 8-year-old daughter cradled in her arms. Wyatt was repairing the water trough when he heard the frantic hoofbeats. He looked up to see Sarah's horse charging across the open ground, foam flying from its mouth, the woman's face streaked with tears and dust. She didn't slow down until she reached the fence, and when she dismounted, she nearly fell. "Please," Sarah gasped, clutching her daughter. "Please, you have to help her." Wyatt vaulted the fence and steadied Sarah with one hand. The little girl in her arms was pale as death, her lips blue, her breathing shallow and ragged. "What happened?" "She fell," Sarah sobbed. "From the hayloft. She's been getting worse all morning. She won't wake up. The doctor's 3 towns over, and I heard about Marcus's boy, and I thought—" "Lena!" Wyatt shouted toward the barn. Lena appeared in the doorway, her hands stained with soil from the garden. She took one look at the child, and her expression shifted from calm to focused in an instant. She ran to them, her eyes already moving over the girl's small, still form. "Bring her inside," Lena said, her voice steady and commanding. "Quickly!" They carried the girl into the house and laid her on Wyatt's bed. Sarah hovered at the bedside, wringing her hands, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Lena placed her hands on the child's head, then her chest, then her abdomen, her eyes closed, her face deeply concentrated. "Internal bleeding," Lena murmured. "Her spleen is damaged. There's pressure building." Sarah let out a strangled cry. "Can you help her? Can you save her?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She opened her eyes and looked at Wyatt. "I need hot water, clean cloths, and yarrow root if you have it. And I need you to hold her mother back. She can't touch the child while I work." Wyatt nodded and gently guided Sarah away from the bed. "Let her do what she needs to do." "But what is she doing?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising. "What kind of medicine?" "The kind that works," Wyatt said firmly. "Trust her." For the next 2 hours, Lena worked in silence. She made a bitter-smelling tea from herbs she pulled from a pouch at her waist and dripped it into the girl's mouth, one drop at a time. She placed her hands over the child's belly and pressed gently, rhythmically, her lips moving in words Wyatt couldn't hear. And slowly, impossibly, color began to return to the girl's face. By noon, the child's breathing had steadied. By mid-afternoon, her eyes fluttered open. "Mama?" she whispered. Sarah broke free from Wyatt's grip and ran to her daughter, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Oh, thank heaven! Thank heaven!" Lena stepped back from the bed, her face drawn and exhausted, sweat beading on her forehead. Wyatt caught her arm as she swayed. "Easy. You need to rest." "I'm fine," Lena said, but her voice was thin. Sarah looked up from her daughter, her face wet with tears. "You saved her. I don't know how, but you saved her." Lena nodded once. "She'll need to rest for a few days. No heavy lifting, no running, and make sure she drinks plenty of water." "I will," Sarah said fervently. "I will. I don't know how to thank you. I don't have much, but I don't want payment," Lena said quietly. "Just take care of her." Sarah stared at Lena for a long moment, her eyes wide and searching. Then she said, "People in town are saying things about you. Terrible things. But I don't care what they say. You're an angel. That's what you are." Lena's expression flickered with something Wyatt couldn't quite name. Pain, maybe, or sorrow. "I'm not an angel." "You are to me," Sarah said. She stayed long enough to make sure her daughter could sit up and drink some broth. Then she gathered the girl in her arms and rode off with a promise to return with food and supplies as thanks. Wyatt watched them go, then turned to Lena. She was standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the horizon. "You all right?" Wyatt asked. "No," Lena said softly. "That woman thinks I'm a miracle, but someone else in that town is going to think I'm a curse, and when they do, they'll come for me." "Let them," Wyatt said. "We'll be ready." Lena shook her head. "You can't fight fear with strength, Wyatt. Fear doesn't listen to reason. It just grows." "Then we'll prove them wrong," Wyatt said, "one person at a time." But even as he said it, he felt the weight of doubt settling in his chest. Because Lena was right. Fear was already spreading. Over the next 2 weeks, the ranch saw more visitors than it had in 6 years. People came from all over the valley, some seeking help, others simply curious. A man with a festering wound that wouldn't heal. A woman whose cow had stopped giving milk. A boy with a twisted ankle that the town doctor couldn't set right. Lena helped them all. She never asked for payment. She never turned anyone away. And word of her gifts spread like wildfire. But with every miracle, the whispers grew louder. Wyatt heard them when he went into town for supplies. He saw the way people looked at him, some with gratitude, others with suspicion. He felt the shift in the air, the way conversations died when he walked into the general store, the way men moved their hands closer to their guns when he passed. And then, one Saturday evening, the town council called a meeting. Wyatt wasn't invited, but Marcus rode out to the ranch to warn him. "They're talking about her, Wyatt," Marcus said, his face grim, "saying she's dangerous, that she's using dark powers, that she's corrupting the valley." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "She's helping people." "I know that," Marcus said, "but not everyone sees it that way. There's a man named Caleb Rourke, runs the saloon, owns half the businesses in town. He's stirring people up, saying she's a threat to the community." "Why would he do that?" "Because his wife came to see Lena last week," Marcus said quietly. "She had a growth in her breast. Lena told her it was dangerous, that she needed to see a real doctor in the city. Mrs. Rourke did, and the doctor confirmed it. He operated, and she's recovering now. But Caleb's angry. He thinks Lena overstepped. He's saying she's practicing medicine without a license, that she's putting people at risk." "That's insane," Wyatt said. "She saved that woman's life." "Maybe so," Marcus said, "but Caleb's got influence, and he's turning people against her." Wyatt felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What are they planning?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but I wanted you to know. Be careful, Wyatt, please." Marcus rode off, and Wyatt stood alone in the yard, staring at the barn where Lena was tending to a lame horse. He wanted to believe that everything would be all right, that the people of the valley would see reason, would recognize Lena's gifts for what they were. But deep down, he knew better. The confrontation came 3 days later. Wyatt was in town, trading pelts for flour and sugar, when he saw the crowd gathering in the square. At the center of it stood Caleb Rourke, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and cold, calculating eyes. He was standing on the steps of the saloon, addressing the crowd in a voice that carried across the square. "We've all heard the stories," Caleb was saying. "A woman with unnatural powers. A woman who can heal the sick, talk to animals, see things no mortal should see. Some of you think she's a blessing. But I ask you, what kind of blessing comes from darkness?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "My wife went to see this woman," Caleb continued, his voice rising. "And this woman, this stranger, told her she was dying, filled her head with fear and dread. And when my wife went to the city doctor, yes, he found something. But who's to say it wasn't this woman who put it there? Who's to say she didn't curse my wife, then offer to lift the curse for gratitude and praise?" "That's a lie," Wyatt said, stepping forward. The crowd turned to look at him. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Wyatt Mercer," Caleb said slowly. "The man who brought this curse into our valley." "She's not a curse," Wyatt said, his voice steady. "She's a healer. She's helped more people in the last month than the rest of us have helped in years." "She's a witch," a woman shouted from the crowd. "She's got the devil's mark on her neck. I seen it." "She's got a scar," Wyatt shot back. "From a man who tried to hurt her. That's all it is." "Then why does she hide it?" another voice called. "Why does she live in a barn like an animal? Why won't she come into town like a decent woman?" "Because she knows how you treat her," Wyatt said, his anger rising. "Because she knows you judge her for things you don't understand." Caleb stepped down from the saloon steps and walked toward Wyatt, his expression hard. "You're defending her because you're blinded by her. Maybe she's cast a spell on you too." "Or maybe I'm just a decent human being," Wyatt said through gritted teeth. Caleb's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "Careful, Mercer. You're outnumbered here." Wyatt glanced around. There were at least 30 people in the square, and more than half of them were armed. His own rifle was back at the ranch, but he didn't back down. "If you've got a problem with Lena, take it up with me," Wyatt said. "But leave her out of it." "We can't leave her out of it," Caleb said coldly. "She's the problem, and problems need to be dealt with." "What are you suggesting?" Wyatt asked, though he already knew the answer. "I'm suggesting she leaves." Caleb said, voluntarily, before something bad happens. And if she doesn't? Caleb smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then we'll make her leave. Wyatt's hands curled into fists. You touch her, and You'll what? Caleb interrupted. Fight all of us? You're one man, Mercer. You can't protect her forever. The crowd murmured in agreement. Wyatt felt the weight of their eyes on him, felt the hostility pressing in from all sides. He turned and walked away, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He had to get back to the ranch. He had to warn Lena. By the time Wyatt reached the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. He found Lena in the paddock, brushing down Sadie, her movements calm and methodical. We need to talk, Wyatt said, his voice tight. Lena looked up, her eyes reading his face. What happened? The town's turning against you, Wyatt said bluntly. Caleb Rourke is stirring them up. He's saying you're dangerous, that you need to leave. Lena set down the brush. I know. You know. I felt it, she said quietly. The fear, the anger, it's been building for days. Then why didn't you say anything? Because there's nothing to say, Lena said. I knew this would happen. I told you it would. We can fight this, Wyatt said. We can't fight fear, Lena said, her voice firm. I told you that before, and I won't let you get hurt because of me. I'm not letting you leave. It's not your choice, Lena said. The hell it isn't, Wyatt snapped. This is my land, my ranch, and you're staying. Lena looked at him for a long moment, and there was a sadness in her eyes that cut deeper than any blade. You're a good man, Wyatt Mercer, but you can't save me from this. Watch me, Wyatt said. Before Lena could respond, a sharp, acrid smell filled the air. Smoke. Wyatt spun around and saw it. Thick, black smoke pouring from the barn, orange flames licking at the wooden beams. No, Wyatt breathed. He ran toward the barn, his heart hammering. Lena was right behind him. They burst through the door and were met with a wall of heat and smoke. The horses were screaming, kicking at their stalls, eyes wide with terror. Get them out, Wyatt shouted. Lena didn't hesitate. She ran to the first stall and flung it open, guiding the panicked horse toward the door. Wyatt did the same, his lungs burning, his eyes streaming with tears. One by one, they freed the horses, driving them out into the night. The last one was a young colt, barely a year old, trapped in the corner stall. The flames had spread to the hayloft above, and burning debris was raining down. Wyatt grabbed the colt's halter and pulled, but the animal was too frightened to move. Lena pushed past him, placing her hands on the colt's neck, her voice low and soothing. Easy, she murmured. Easy. I've got you. The colt calmed, just enough, and Lena let it out. They stumbled into the yard, coughing and gasping, as the barn collapsed behind them in a roar of fire and sparks. Wyatt fell to his knees, his chest heaving. Lena sank down beside him, her face blackened with soot, her hands trembling. They did this, Wyatt said hoarsely. They burned it down. I know, Lena said. Why? To send a message, Lena said quietly. To show us what they're willing to do. Wyatt looked at the burning wreckage, then at Lena. This isn't over. No, Lena agreed. It's just beginning. They spent the rest of the night watching the barn burn, making sure the flames didn't spread to the house or the pasture. The horses milled nervously in the paddock, and the dog pressed close to Lena's side, whimpering softly. As dawn broke, painting the sky in pale gray light, Wyatt saw them, riders. At least a dozen of them, silhouetted against the rising sun, riding slowly toward the ranch. Wyatt stood, his hand moving to the rifle he'd retrieved from the house. Lena stood beside him, her face calm, but her eyes hard. They're coming to finish it, she said. Let them try, Wyatt said. The riders stopped at the edge of the property. Caleb Rourke sat at the front, his face shadowed beneath his hat. Last chance, Mercer, Caleb called. Send her away, and we'll leave you in peace. Go to hell, Wyatt shouted back. Caleb's jaw tightened. So be it. He raised his hand and the riders drew their weapons. And Wyatt knew, with a cold certainty that settled in his bones, that this was the moment everything changed. This was the moment he'd have to choose between survival and principle, between safety and truth, between fear and love. He chose love. He stepped in front of Lena, his rifle raised, his voice steady. You want her? You go through me. The riders hesitated, and in that hesitation Lena stepped forward. Wait, she said. Wyatt turned. Lena, don't. I won't let you die for me, she said quietly. Then she raised her voice, addressing the riders. You think I'm a curse. You think I'm dangerous. But you don't know me. You don't know what I am. We know enough, Caleb said coldly. No, Lena said. You know fear, that's all. And fear makes people do terrible things. She walked forward slowly, deliberately, until she stood between Wyatt and the riders. I didn't ask to be born with this gift, she said. I didn't choose it, but I've spent my whole life trying to use it to help people. I've healed your children. I've saved your livestock. I've given everything I have to this valley, and you've repaid me with hatred. Because you're unnatural, a voice shouted. I'm different, Lena said. But different doesn't mean evil. She turned to Caleb, her eyes locking onto his. You're afraid because your wife almost died. You're afraid because you couldn't save her, and I could. But that fear is eating you alive, Caleb Rourke. It's poisoning you, and if you let it, it'll destroy you. Caleb's face went pale. You don't know what you're talking about. I know more than you think, Lena said softly. I can feel it. Your grief, your guilt. You blame yourself for not seeing the signs sooner. You think if you'd been more attentive, more careful, she wouldn't have gotten sick. And now you're trying to turn that guilt into anger, to make me the villain, so you don't have to face the truth. Caleb's hand shook on the reins. Shut up. The truth is you love her, Lena said. And love makes us vulnerable. It makes us afraid. But fear doesn't protect the people we love. It destroys them. I said, shut up, Caleb roared, and he raised his rifle. But before he could fire, another voice rang out. Put the gun down, Caleb. Everyone turned. Marcus Kinley rode forward, his own rifle trained on Caleb. Behind him were a dozen more riders, people from the valley, people whose children Lena had healed, whose animals she'd saved. This woman saved my son's life, Marcus said, and I won't let you hurt her. Sarah Brennan rode up beside him, her daughter sitting in front of her on the saddle. She saved my daughter. I owe her everything. One by one, others stepped forward, their voices rising in defense. Caleb's face twisted with rage and confusion. You're all fools. She's bewitched you. No, Marcus said quietly. She's shown us who we really are. And I don't like what I see. The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating, and then Caleb lowered his rifle. This isn't over, he said, his voice shaking. Yes, it is, Marcus said. Go home, Caleb. Take care of your wife. And leave this woman alone. Caleb stared at Lena for a long moment, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Then he turned his horse and rode away. The other riders followed one by one until only Marcus and the others remained. Wyatt lowered his rifle, his entire body shaking with adrenaline. Marcus dismounted and walked over to Lena. I'm sorry, he said, for what they did, for what they tried to do. Lena nodded, her face pale. Thank you. We'll help you rebuild, Marcus said. The barn, whatever you need. I appreciate that, Lena said softly. But even as she spoke, her legs buckled. Wyatt caught her before she fell, his heart lurching. Lena? Her face was ashen, her breath coming in short gasps. She looked up at him, and there was fear in her eyes, real, raw fear. The baby, she whispered. Something's wrong. Wyatt's blood ran cold. What baby? I'm pregnant, Lena said, and then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed in his arms. Wyatt carried Lena into the house, her body limp in his arms, her skin cold despite the morning heat. Sarah Brennan rushed ahead to clear the bed while Marcus shouted orders to the others outside. The world seemed to tilt and spin around Wyatt as he laid Lena down as gently as he could, his hands shaking, his mind reeling. Pregnant. She was pregnant, and he hadn't known. She hadn't told him. Sarah pushed him aside and pressed her hand to Lena's forehead. She's burning up. We need to cool her down, get her temperature under control. I'll get water, Marcus said, already moving toward the door. Wyatt stood frozen, staring at Lena's pale face, her closed eyes, the shallow rise and fall of her chest. "How long has she been pregnant?" "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice clipped and efficient. "But by the look of her, I'd say 5, maybe 6 months. Why she didn't tell you?" "Because she knew I'd worry," Wyatt said hoarsely. "Because she knew it would make things harder." Sarah gave him a sharp look. "Well, things just got a lot harder. Now either help me or get out of my way." Wyatt forced himself to move. He helped Sarah strip away Lena's soot-stained dress and cover her with a clean sheet. Marcus returned with buckets of cold water, and they soaked cloths to lay across her forehead, her wrists, her neck. Sarah worked with the kind of calm competence that came from years of birthing babies and tending sick children on the frontier, but Wyatt could see the worry in her eyes. "What's wrong with her?" Wyatt demanded. "Why won't she wake up?" "Could be a lot of things," Sarah said. "The smoke, the stress, the fear. Her body's been through hell, and now it's trying to protect the baby the only way it knows how, by shutting down everything else." "Will she be all right?" Sarah hesitated. "I don't know. We need to wait and see." "That's not good enough." "It's all we've got," Sarah snapped. "Now sit down and let me work." Wyatt sat. He watched as Sarah moved around the room, mixing tinctures, checking Lena's pulse, murmuring soft words of encouragement, even though Lena couldn't hear them. The minutes stretched into hours. Outside, the sound of hammering and voices drifted through the windows as Marcus and the others began clearing away the burned remnants of the barn. Wyatt couldn't think about the barn, couldn't think about anything except the woman lying in his bed, fighting for her life and the life of the child she carried. His child. The realization hit him like a fist to the chest. It had to be his. They'd been alone together for months now, and though they'd never spoken about what had grown between them, never put a name to the quiet affection, the stolen glances, the moments when their hands brushed and neither pulled away, Wyatt knew. He'd felt it. The shift from strangers to something more, from rescuer and rescued to partners, to something deeper than words. And now she was carrying his child, and he hadn't even known. Afternoon gave way to evening. Sarah changed the cool cloths, spooned water into Lena's mouth, watched and waited. Wyatt didn't move from his chair. He barely breathed. Then, just as the last light of day was fading from the windows, Lena's eyes opened. She blinked slowly, her gaze unfocused, confused. Then she saw Wyatt, and her expression cleared. "The baby," she whispered, her hand moving to her belly. "Still there," Sarah said quickly, moving to her side. "Still fighting, just like you." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want you to find out like this." Wyatt leaned forward, taking her hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid," Lena said, her voice breaking. "Afraid you'd send me away to keep me safe. Afraid you'd think I was trying to trap you. Afraid that if I said it out loud, it would make it real, and real things can be taken away." "I would never send you away," Wyatt said fiercely. "Never." "You say that now," Lena said, "but when the town finds out, the town can go to hell," Wyatt said. "I don't care what they think. I care about you, and I care about this child." Lena searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. She found none. "I love you," Wyatt said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I've loved you since the moment I saw you standing in that wagon, refusing to break. And I'll love you until the day I die." Lena's tears spilled over. "I love you too." Wyatt leaned down and kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. But only for a moment. Sarah cleared her throat. "This is all very touching, but we're not out of danger yet. Lena needs rest, proper food, and no stress. That means no more confrontations, no more healing half the valley, and absolutely no more barn fires." "Agreed," Wyatt said. "I can't promise that," Lena said weakly. "Well, you'd better try," Sarah said sternly, "because that baby needs you strong, and you can't be strong if you're burning yourself out for everyone else." Lena nodded, though Wyatt could see the resistance in her eyes. Helping people was as much a part of her as breathing. Asking her to stop was like asking the sun not to rise. But she would try, for the baby, for him. Sarah stayed through the night, monitoring Lena's condition. By morning, Lena's fever had broken and her color had returned. She was still weak, still tired, but she was alive. And so was the baby. Marcus came by to check on them, his hat in his hands, his face weathered and kind. "We've cleared the barn site," he said. "Salvaged what we could. The lumber's mostly gone, but the stone foundation's still good. We can rebuild if you're willing." "I'm willing," Wyatt said, "but I can't pay you." "We're not asking for payment," Marcus said. "We're asking for the chance to make things right." Over the next week, the valley came together in a way Wyatt had never seen before. Men arrived at dawn with lumber and tools. Women brought food and blankets. Children ran errands and fetched water. Even people who had stood with Caleb Rourke in the square came to help, shamefaced and quiet, offering their labor as an apology they couldn't speak aloud. The barn began to rise again, board by board, nail by nail. It was smaller than before, simpler, but it was sturdy and sound. And it was built with hands that had once held weapons against Lena, but now worked to give her shelter. Lena watched from the porch, wrapped in a quilt, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. She didn't say much, but Wyatt could see the emotion in her eyes, the wonder, the fragile hope. Sarah visited every day, bringing herbs and tonics, checking on Lena's health and the baby's progress. "You're doing well," she said one afternoon, her hand on Lena's stomach. "The baby's strong. I can feel it kicking." "I can too," Lena said softly. "It's like a little warrior in there fighting to be born." "Takes after its mother," Sarah said with a smile. But the smile didn't reach her eyes, and Wyatt saw the worry there. "What is it?" he asked. Sarah hesitated. "The baby's early. Not by much, maybe a month, but enough to make things complicated. And with everything Lena's been through, the stress, the smoke, the collapse, there's a risk." "What kind of risk?" "The baby might come too soon," Sarah said bluntly. "And if it does, it might not survive. We need to be prepared." Wyatt felt the familiar knot of fear tighten in his chest. "What do we do?" "Keep her calm, keep her rested, and pray the baby stays put for as long as possible." But fate, Wyatt was learning, didn't listen to prayers. 2 weeks after the barn raising, Caleb Rourke came to the ranch alone. Wyatt saw him riding up the path and immediately reached for his rifle. But Caleb's hands were empty, his posture slumped, his face haggard. "I'm not here to fight," Caleb said as he dismounted. "Then why are you here?" Wyatt asked, his hand still on the rifle. "To apologize," Caleb said. His voice was rough, like the words were being dragged out of him against his will. "And to ask for help." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "Help with what?" "My wife," Caleb said. "She's dying." The words hung in the air between them. "The doctor in the city said the surgery was a success," Caleb continued, his voice breaking. "But something went wrong. An infection, he thinks. She's been getting worse for days, and now she can't even get out of bed. The fever's so high she doesn't know who I am half the time." He looked up at Wyatt, and there were tears in his eyes. "I know I don't deserve your help. I know what I did, what I tried to do. But I'm begging you, please, let her see Lena." Wyatt's jaw tightened. Every instinct in him screamed to send Caleb away, to protect Lena from the man who had tried to destroy her. But he saw the desperation in Caleb's face, the raw, unfiltered grief, and he knew he couldn't turn him away. "Wait here," Wyatt said. He went inside and found Lena sitting by the fire, mending a shirt. She looked up as he entered, and her eyes immediately went to the window where Caleb stood. "I know," she said before Wyatt could speak. "I felt him coming." "You don't have to do this," Wyatt said. "You don't owe him anything." "I know," Lena said. She set down the shirt and stood, her hand resting on her belly. "But his wife does, and she didn't do anything wrong." "Lena, I have to go," she said firmly. "You know I do." Wyatt wanted to argue, wanted to lock the door and keep her safe, but he saw the determination in her eyes and knew it would be useless. "Then I'm coming with you," he said. They rode to Caleb's house in tense silence, Lena seated in front of Wyatt on Sadie, Caleb riding ahead. The house was a modest 2-story structure on the edge of town, surrounded by a white picket fence that had seen better days. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sickness, sweat and fever, and the cloying sweetness of infection. Caleb led them upstairs to a small bedroom where his wife lay in a tangle of sweat-soaked sheets, her face pale and gaunt, her breathing labored. Lana went to her immediately, placing her hand on the woman's forehead. The woman's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. "Who?" she began, her voice a rasp. "Shh," Lena said gently. "I'm here to help." She worked quickly, her hands moving over the woman's body, her eyes closed in concentration. Wyatt watched from the doorway, his heart in his throat. Caleb stood beside him, his fists clenched, his face a mask of anguish. After what felt like an eternity, Lena opened her eyes. "The infection is deep," she said, "in her blood. The surgery wound didn't heal properly, and now it's spreading." "Can you save her?" Caleb asked, his voice barely audible. "I can try," Lena said, "but I'll need supplies. Yarrow, golden seal, echinacea, and clean water, lots of it." Caleb ran to get what she needed, and Lena set to work. She made a poultice and packed it into the wound. She brewed a bitter tea and coaxed the woman into drinking it, drop by drop. She placed her hands over the woman's heart and whispered words in a language Wyatt didn't recognize. Hours passed, the sun set, the moon rose. And slowly, impossibly, the woman's breathing steadied. The fever broke. Color returned to her cheeks. By dawn, she was sitting up, asking for food. Caleb fell to his knees beside the bed, sobbing. "Thank you," he choked out. "Thank you." Lena stood, swaying with exhaustion. Wyatt caught her arm and steadied her. "We're going home," he said firmly. Caleb looked up, his face wet with tears. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Fear makes us do terrible things, but love can make us do better. Remember that." Caleb nodded, unable to speak. Wyatt led Lena out of the house and helped her onto Sadie. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the first light of dawn breaking over the hills. But as they approached the house, Lena gasped and doubled over. "Lena?" Wyatt said, alarm shooting through him. "The baby," she said, her voice tight with pain. "It's coming." Wyatt's blood ran cold. "It's too early." "I know," Lena said through gritted teeth, "but it's not waiting." Wyatt urged Sadie into a gallop, his mind racing. They reached the house, and he carried Lena inside, shouting for Sarah even though he knew she wasn't there. He laid Lena on the bed and ran to the door, but before he could leave, Lena grabbed his hand. "Don't go," she said, fear stark in her eyes. "Please don't leave me." Wyatt looked at her, at the woman he loved, at the terror and strength warring in her face, and he made his choice. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. He stayed by her side as the contractions came, harder and faster, racking her body with pain. He held her hand and spoke soft words of encouragement, even though he had no idea what he was doing. He brought water and cloths and tried to remember everything Sarah had said about birthing babies. The hours blurred together. Lena screamed and cried and cursed him and the world and the child that was tearing its way into existence. And Wyatt stayed, his heart breaking with every cry, his hands steady even as his soul trembled. Then, just as the first rays of sun broke through the window, Lena gave one final, wrenching push, and the baby was born. Wyatt caught the tiny, slippery body in his hands, his breath stopping. The baby was so small, so fragile, its skin blue-tinged and translucent. It wasn't breathing. Panic seized him. He turned the baby over, rubbed its back the way he'd seen Sarah do with a stillborn calf once, desperate and terrified. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on. Breathe, please." Nothing. Lena was crying, reaching for the baby, her face pale with fear. Wyatt rubbed harder, his vision blurring with tears. "Breathe, damn you, breathe!" And then, impossibly, miraculously, the baby coughed. A thin, reedy wail filled the room. Wyatt nearly collapsed with relief. He wrapped the baby in a clean cloth and placed it in Lena's arms. She cradled the tiny girl, because it was a girl, perfect and fierce and alive, and sobbed. "She's here," Lena whispered. "She's really here." "She's beautiful," Wyatt said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother." Lena looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "We did it." "You did it," Wyatt said. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." Lena smiled, exhausted and radiant, and looked down at their daughter. "What should we name her?" Wyatt thought for a moment. Then he said, Hope, because that's what she is. That's what you both are. Lena's smile widened. Hope Mercer. I like that. She closed her eyes, still holding the baby close, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Wyatt sat beside her, watching them both, and felt something settle in his chest, something that had been broken for a long, long time. Peace. Sarah Brennan arrived at dawn the next morning with her medical bag and a basket of food. She'd been making her rounds in town when word reached her about the baby, and she'd ridden through the night to get to the ranch. When she stepped into the bedroom and saw Lena propped up against the pillows, the tiny bundle cradled in her arms, her weathered face broke into a smile. Well, I'll be, Sarah breathed, setting down her bag. You did it without me. We didn't have much choice, Wyatt said from his chair beside the bed. He hadn't slept, hadn't moved except to fetch water and clean cloths. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, but there was a light in them that Sarah had never seen before. She moved to the bed and gently examined the baby, checking her breathing, her color, the strength of her tiny limbs. She's small, Sarah said, but she's a fighter, just like her mama. Will she be all right? Lena asked, her voice hoarse with worry and fatigue. If you keep her warm, keep her fed, and give her time to grow, I don't see why not, Sarah said. But the next few weeks will be critical. She came early, and early babies are fragile. You'll need to watch her closely. I won't take my eyes off her, Lena said. Sarah smiled and placed a gentle hand on Lena's shoulder. I know you won't. Now, let me check on you. She examined Lena with the practiced efficiency of someone who had delivered dozens of babies in conditions far worse than this. When she was satisfied, she straightened and nodded. You're doing well. Better than I expected, given everything you've been through. But you need rest. Real rest. No getting up, no tending animals, no healing half the valley. I'll make sure of it, Wyatt said firmly. Lena started to protest, but Sarah cut her off. Don't argue with me, girl. You've got a daughter to think about now. She needs you healthy and strong. Lena looked down at the baby and her expression softened. All right. Sarah stayed for most of the day, teaching Wyatt how to help with the feeding, how to change the cloths, how to recognize the signs of trouble. By the time she left, Wyatt's head was spinning with instructions and warnings, but he felt more confident, more capable. As Sarah mounted her horse, she looked back at him. You're a good man, Wyatt Mercer. That woman and that baby are lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Wyatt said. Sarah smiled. I'll spread the word in town. Let people know mother and baby are doing well. Might help ease some of the lingering tension. Appreciate it, Wyatt said. She rode off, and Wyatt returned to the house to find Lena asleep, the baby nestled against her chest. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching them, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in him. He would do whatever it took to keep them safe. Whatever it took. Over the next few days, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Wyatt took over all the work, feeding the animals, mending fences, hauling water, while Lena focused on the baby. Hope was a demanding little thing, waking every few hours to feed, crying with a surprisingly strong voice for such a tiny body. But she was thriving, growing stronger each day. Wyatt found himself mesmerized by her, the way her fingers curled around his thumb, the way her eyes, dark like Lena's, followed the light, the way she made little snuffling sounds when she slept. He'd never thought much about fatherhood before, never imagined he'd have a family. But now, holding this fragile, perfect life in his hands, he couldn't imagine anything else. On the 5th day, Marcus arrived with a wagon full of supplies, lumber, nails, fabric for curtains, jars of preserves, and a hand-carved cradle that his own children had used. Thought you could use these, Marcus said, unloading the wagon with Wyatt's help. You've already done so much, Wyatt said. I can't. You can, and you will, Marcus said firmly. This valley owes you and Lena more than we can ever repay. Let us help. Wyatt nodded, too moved to speak. Marcus set the cradle by the bed, and when Lena saw it, tears filled her eyes. It's beautiful. My wife made it, Marcus said quietly. She'd be glad to know it's being used again. Over the following weeks, others came too. Sarah brought medicines and tonics. Caleb Rourke and his wife arrived with a quilt they'd sewn together, its patches telling the story of the valley, fields and mountains, horses and hawks, all stitched with care. Even people who had once stood against Lena came with offerings of food, tools, and quiet apologies. The barn was finished and restocked with hay, the fences were mended, the garden was weeded and watered, and slowly, piece by piece, the ranch was transformed from a place of survival into a place of life. But it wasn't just the ranch that was changing. The valley itself was different. People began coming to Wyatt and Lena not with suspicion, but with questions. How did Lena know which herbs to use? Could she teach them? Could she show them how to read the land the way she did? At first, Lena was hesitant. The memory of the mob, the fire, the rifles pointed at her heart. It was all too fresh. But Wyatt encouraged her. "They want to learn," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, Hope asleep in Lena's arms. "They want to understand. That's how you change fear, not by hiding from it, but by shining a light on it." Lena looked at him, her eyes searching. "You really believe that?" "I do," Wyatt said. "And I think you do too." So Lena began to teach. She started small, showing Sarah how to make poultices for infections, teaching Marcus's oldest son how to calm a skittish horse. Word spread, and soon people were coming from all over the valley, eager to learn from the woman they had once feared. Lena discovered that she had a gift for teaching, just as she had a gift for healing. She explained things in simple terms, never talking down to people, always patient and kind. And the more she taught, the more the valley began to see her not as a threat, but as a treasure. The winter came, cold and hard, but the ranch was ready. The new barn was stocked with feed, the house was insulated against the wind, and there was enough firewood to last until spring. Wyatt and Lena spent the long evenings by the fire, taking turns holding Hope, telling stories, planning for the future. "I want to build a school," Lena said one night. Wyatt looked up from the piece of leather he was working. "A school?" "Not just for reading and writing," Lena said. "For everything. Healing, animal care, understanding the land. A place where people can come to learn without fear." Wyatt smiled. "I think that's a fine idea." "You do?" "I do," Wyatt said, "and I'll help you build it." Lena's eyes shone. "We'll need land, space for gardens and pens for animals, maybe near the creek where there's water and shade." "We'll start in the spring," Wyatt said, "when the ground thaws." Lena leaned against him, and Wyatt wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Hope stirred in her cradle and let out a soft coo. They both looked down at her, and Wyatt felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it nearly took his breath away. He had everything he needed, everything he'd ever wanted, right here. Spring came with a rush of green and gold. The hills burst into bloom, the creek ran high and clear, and the valley came alive with birdsong. Wyatt and Lena broke ground on the school, a simple structure near the creek, just as they'd planned. Marcus and others from the valley came to help, and within weeks the frame was up. By summer, the school was finished. It was a single room with large windows to let in the light, benches made from split logs, and shelves lined with jars of herbs and books donated by families across the valley. On the wall, Lena hung a sign she'd carved herself, "Valley School of Healing and Understanding." The first class had 12 students, men, women, and children, all eager to learn. Lena taught them how to identify medicinal plants, how to treat wounds, how to listen to animals. Wyatt taught practical skills, building, mending, working with wood and metal. And Hope, now 6 months old and full of energy, became the unofficial mascot of the school. She sat in a basket near the door during lessons, gurgling and reaching for anyone who passed by. The students adored her, and Lena often joked that Hope was already teaching them patience. As the months passed, the school grew. More students came. More subjects were added. Lena brought in Sarah to teach midwifery and basic medicine. Marcus taught farming techniques. Even Caleb Rourke came to teach carpentry, his hands still skilled despite his age. The valley was healing, just as Lena had healed so many individuals. The fear that had once gripped the community was fading, replaced by curiosity and respect. People who had never spoken to each other before were now working side by side, learning together, building something greater than themselves. And at the center of it all were Wyatt, Lena, and Hope. But healing, Wyatt was learning, was never a straight line. One afternoon in late autumn, nearly a year after Hope's birth, a stranger rode into the valley. He was a tall man with a scar across his cheek and eyes that held too many hard years. He asked around town for the woman who could heal, and someone directed him to the ranch. Wyatt was working in the new barn when the man arrived. He stepped out to greet him, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle leaning against the doorframe. "Help you with something?" Wyatt asked, his tone neutral but wary. "I'm looking for a woman named Lena," the stranger said. "I heard she's here." "Who's asking?" The man hesitated. "My name's Thomas Vale. I'm her brother." Wyatt's stomach tightened. Lena had never mentioned a brother, never mentioned any family at all. "Wait here," Wyatt said. He found Lena in the garden with Hope strapped to her back, harvesting the last of the squash. When he told her about the visitor, her face went pale. "My brother," she whispered. "He found me." "Is that a problem?" Wyatt asked carefully. "I don't know," Lena said. "I haven't seen him in 10 years, not since I ran away." "Do you want to see him?" Lena looked toward the house, then at Hope, then at Wyatt. "I need to know what he wants." They walked back together, and when Lena saw the man standing in the yard, she stopped. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Thomas took off his hat. "Lena," he said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry." "For what?" Lena asked, her tone guarded. "For everything," Thomas said. "For not protecting you when Father sold you, for not coming after you, for letting you go through all that alone." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. Thomas stepped forward. "I've been looking for you for 5 years, ever since I got out of prison. I heard stories about a woman who could heal, who had a gift. I knew it had to be you." "Prison?" Lena said. "I killed the man who bought you," Thomas said bluntly, "the one who gave you that scar. When I found out what he'd done, I tracked him down and put a bullet in him. They locked me up for it, but I'd do it again." Lena's hand went to her neck, to the scar she usually kept hidden. "You killed him." "He deserved worse," Thomas said. "But it's done now. And I wanted to find you, to make sure you were all right, to tell you I'm sorry." Wyatt watched Lena's face, saw the conflict there, anger and pain and something that might have been relief. "I'm all right," Lena said finally. "Better than all right. I have a home now, a family." Thomas's eyes moved to Wyatt, then to the baby on Lena's back. "I can see that, and I'm glad." "What do you want, Thomas?" Lena asked. "Nothing," Thomas said. "Just to know you're safe, and to tell you that if you ever need anything, ever, you send word. I'll come." Lena studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Thank you." Thomas put his hat back on. "I'll be going then. I don't want to cause you any trouble." "Wait," Lena said. She stepped forward and, after a moment's hesitation, embraced him. "Thank you for coming. It means more than you know." Thomas hugged her back, fierce and brief, then mounted his horse and rode away. Wyatt came to stand beside Lena as they watched him disappear over the hill. "You all right?" "I think so," Lena said. "It's strange. I spent so many years angry at him for not saving me. But now I realize I didn't need saving. I saved myself." Wyatt took her hand. "You did. And you saved me too." Lena looked at him, and the love in her eyes was so bright it hurt to look at. "We saved each other." That winter was the mildest the valley had seen in years. The school continued to thrive, and the ranch became a gathering place for the community. People came for lessons, for advice, for the simple comfort of being around Lena and Wyatt and the life they'd built. Hope was walking now, toddling around the house and the barn with fearless curiosity. She had Lena's dark eyes and Wyatt's stubborn determination, and she was utterly fearless around the animals. The dog followed her everywhere, and even the horses lowered their heads to let her pat their noses. On Hope's first birthday, the entire valley came to celebrate. They brought food and gifts and music, filling the ranch with laughter and warmth. Caleb Rourke played the fiddle while children danced in the yard. Sarah brought a cake she'd baked herself, its frosting lopsided but delicious. Marcus gave Hope a tiny wooden horse he'd carved, and she clutched it to her chest like treasure. As the sun set and the party wound down, Wyatt stood on the porch with Lena, watching the last of the guests ride away. Hard to believe it's only been a year, Lena said. Feels like a lifetime, Wyatt agreed. A good lifetime, Lena said, leaning against him. The best, Wyatt said. Hope came toddling over, the wooden horse still clutched in one hand, and grabbed Wyatt's leg. He scooped her up and she giggled, pointing at the stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Star, Hope said, one of the handful of words she'd learned. That's right, Wyatt said. Stars. Lena wrapped her arms around both of them, and they stood there together, a family forged in fire and fear and love. The years that followed were good ones. The school expanded, adding more rooms and more teachers. Lena's reputation spread beyond the valley, and people came from distant towns to learn from her. But she never forgot where she came from, never lost her humility or her compassion. Wyatt built a second barn and expanded the pastures. The ranch became known not just as a place of healing, but as a place of refuge, a place where anyone, no matter their past or their struggles, could find acceptance and peace. Hope grew into a bright, curious child who loved the animals as much as her mother did. By the time she was 5, she could identify every herb in the garden and calm a spooked horse with a single touch. Lena taught her everything she knew, and Wyatt taught her to be strong, to stand up for what was right, to never let fear dictate her choices. The valley too continued to change. The fear and suspicion that had once defined it were replaced by a spirit of cooperation and understanding. People who had once been enemies became friends. Families who had been divided by prejudice and ignorance came together. And at the heart of it all was the story of a man who had spent his last dollar to buy a woman's freedom, and a woman who had refused to let the world break her. On Hope's 10th birthday, the valley held a celebration unlike any before. A new building was unveiled, a community center built with funds and labor donated by everyone in the valley. It stood at the center of town, a symbol of everything they had overcome and everything they had built together. At the dedication ceremony, the mayor, a kind man who had been elected after Caleb Rourke stepped down to focus on his carpentry, asked Lena to say a few words. She stood on the steps, Wyatt beside her, Hope holding her hand, and looked out at the faces of the people she had once feared and who had once feared her. I came to this valley as a stranger, Lena said, her voice clear and strong. I was broken and afraid and alone. But you gave me a home, you gave me a chance, and together we built something beautiful. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. We all carry scars. Some are visible, like mine. Others are hidden, but scars don't define us. What defines us is what we do with the pain. Do we let it make us bitter? Or do we let it make us better? The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. I chose better, Lena said, and so did this valley, and I am so proud of what we've become. The applause was thunderous. People cheered and clapped and wiped away tears. Wyatt pulled Lena into an embrace, and Hope wrapped her arms around both of them. As the celebration continued into the night, Wyatt found himself standing on the edge of the crowd, watching it all with a sense of profound gratitude. He thought back to that day in the trading post, to the moment he'd seen Lena standing on that wagon, bruised and bound but unbroken. He'd thought he was rescuing her, but she had rescued him too. Rescued him from a life of loneliness and isolation. Rescued him from the ghosts of his past. Together they had built something that neither of them could have built alone. A home, a family, a community. And that, Wyatt thought as he watched Lena laugh with Sarah and Hope play with the other children, was the greatest miracle of all. Not the healing, not the gifts, but the simple, extraordinary power of love and courage to transform the world. Years later, when Hope was grown and had children of her own, she would tell the story of her parents, of the rancher who spent everything he had to save a stranger, of the woman who refused to let fear define her, of the valley that learned to see past its prejudices and build something beautiful, and every time she told it, she would end the same way. My mother once said that we all carry scars, but scars are just proof that we survived, that we fought, that we lived. And if we're lucky, they remind us of the people who stood beside us when the world tried to break us. My father was that person for my mother. My mother was that person for my father. And together, they taught an entire valley what it means to choose love over fear. That's the legacy they left me. That's the legacy I'll leave my children. And that's a legacy worth living for. The story of Wyatt Mercer and Lena Vale became legend in the valley. The school they built still stands, training healers and teachers and people who believe in the power of understanding. The ranch still welcomes anyone who needs refuge, and the community center still bears a plaque with Lena's words engraved on it. But more than the buildings, more than the words, what endures is the truth at the heart of their story. That one act of courage can change everything. That love is stronger than fear. And that no matter how broken we are, we can always choose to become something better, together.